The small town of Riverside, Colorado sits nestled between two mountain ranges like a secret that nobody important needs to know. Main Street has a diner, a hardware store, a bank, and a post office. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and not always in a good way. Captain Sarah Chen grew up in Riverside. Her father was a mechanic, her mother a nurse at the county hospital. She was the middle child of three, the quiet one who liked to read books about history and strategy. Nobody in her family had ever served in the military. Nobody in her extended family either. Sarah was the first. When she joined the Army at 22, right after college, the reactions were mixed. Some people said she was brave. Others said she was running away from something. The truth was simpler than that. She was running toward something. She wanted to be part of something bigger than Riverside, Colorado, population 4,847. By the time she made captain at age 31, she had been deployed 3 times. She had led her unit through the mountains of Afghanistan, through the deserts of Iraq, and through the complicated politics of military life at Fort Carson, just an hour down the road from Riverside. She had earned her rank through skill and determination. She had never asked for special treatment, never complained about the work, never made excuses. But being a woman in the Army, especially a woman who gave orders, had its challenges. Captain Sarah Chen was not the kind of woman that some of the men in her unit expected. She did not carry herself like a victim looking for sympathy. She did not smile too much or laugh too little. She was competent and calm, and she expected the same from everyone around her. This made her dangerous in the eyes of certain officers who believed that strength had a particular look, and that look was male. Colonel Marcus Reeves was one of those men. Colonel Reeves had been at Fort Carson for 6 years. He ran the artillery unit with an iron hand and a cold heart. He believed in tradition, in hierarchy, in the way things had always been done. He did not believe in change. When Sarah Chen was transferred to his unit as a section chief, he saw it as a challenge to his authority. "Welcome to the real Army," he said to her on her first day, his eyes cold above his mustache. "We do things a certain way here. I hope you can keep up." Sarah nodded and said nothing. She had heard this before, from other colonels, other majors, other captains who felt threatened by her presence and her competence. She kept up. She did more than keep up. Within 3 months, her section had the highest readiness scores in the battalion. Her people were better trained, better organized, and more efficient than the others. This made Colonel Reeves angry in ways he could not openly express. So he found other ways. He gave her the worst assignments. He questioned her decisions in front of her subordinates. He made jokes in the officers' club that everyone could hear, jokes about token women in the military, about political correctness gone mad, about how the Army was not what it used to be. And everyone laughed because that is what you do when a colonel tells a joke. Sarah did not complain. This was the unspoken rule. You did your job, you did it well, and you did not complain. Complaining meant you could not handle it. Complaining meant you were weak. On a Tuesday morning in March, Sarah was called into Colonel Reeves's office. It was unusual. He normally summoned her in front of others, in meetings or briefings where her responses were on display. This time he closed the door. "I'm pulling you from the rotation," he said, sitting behind his desk, not offering her a seat. "We're deploying to the Middle East for a special operation, dangerous work, high-risk situation. I need only my best people, people I trust completely." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had been deployed 3 times, but the possibility of a 4th deployment always carried weight. "Sir, I want to go," she said. "My section is ready." "Your section, yes," Colonel Reeves said, looking at a file on his desk. "But not you. I'm bringing in Captain Mitchell to lead instead. He has the experience I need for this operation." Captain Mitchell was a good officer, but he had been at Fort Carson for only 14 months. Sarah had been in the Army for 9 years. Mitchell had commanded a section for 6 months. Sarah had commanded hers for 3 years. "Sir, with respect," Sarah began. "That's my decision," Colonel Reeves cut her off. "You'll stay here and oversee training operations. It's important work." She wanted to argue. She wanted to demand to know the real reason. She wanted to know why her experience mattered less than some undefined criteria that Colonel Reeves kept to himself. But she did not do any of those things. "Yes, sir," she said. She left his office and went back to her barracks. She did not tell anyone what had happened. She did not call her mother. She did not write an email to friends. She simply accepted it the way she had accepted everything else. 2 weeks later, her section deployed without her. She watched them load the transport planes at dawn. She watched Captain Mitchell stand in front of them, giving a speech that she should have been giving. She watched the planes lift off and disappear into the clouds. Then she went back to her desk and did her job. The training operations continued. Sarah oversaw range procedures, equipment maintenance, certifications. It was important work, as Colonel Reeves had said. It was also work that any junior officer could have done. For 3 weeks, she received regular emails from her section. They were in-country, setting up operations in a small base in the northern region. They were integrating with local forces. They were preparing for their first mission. On the 4th week, the emails stopped. Sarah was in her office when she heard. She was updating training logs when her friend, Major Patricia Williams, came in and closed the door. Patricia was the only officer at the fort who had never treated Sarah as anything other than a peer and a friend. "There's been an incident," Patricia said quietly. "Your section, IED on a patrol route, multiple casualties." The words did not make sense at first. They were just sounds. "Who?" Sarah asked. 9 confirmed dead, 12 injured. They're still getting reports, but... Captain Mitchell. Patricia nodded slowly. Sarah did not remember standing up. She did not remember moving. She found herself at the window, looking out at the parade ground below, where the morning sun was painting everything in gold. "There's more," Patricia said. "The commanding officer of the base where they were stationed. He's saying something about the patrol route being compromised, about warning signs that were missed. He's saying that..." Patricia paused. "He's saying that Captain Mitchell ignored protocols, that your section went out without proper reconnaissance." Sarah turned to look at her friend. "That's not how it works," she said quietly. "You don't just ignore protocols." "No," Patricia agreed, "you don't." By that evening, the names of the dead were released. Sarah sat in her quarters and read each name carefully. Rodriguez, who had a daughter. Jackson, who was from Atlanta and wanted to open a restaurant. Torres, who always laughed at jokes nobody else got. Kemp, who was engaged. 9 names, 9 families who would receive a folded flag. The investigation took 2 weeks. The preliminary report said that Captain Mitchell had made a decision to deviate from the approved patrol route based on intelligence from local forces. The deviation led them into an area where insurgents had placed an IED. The protocol stated that all deviations had to be approved by the commanding officer. Mitchell had not requested approval. It was deemed a field commander's error. The report also stated that higher-ranking officers at the forward operating base, who reviewed the incident after the fact, had noted that proper authorization channels should have been enforced more strictly. The implication was clear. Someone higher up had failed in oversight. That someone was Colonel Marcus Reeves, who had signed the deployment authorization and established the protocols that Mitchell had violated. The investigation concluded 3 weeks later. No formal charges were filed. Colonel Reeves was strongly encouraged to accept a reassignment. He took early retirement 2 months later and moved to North Carolina. But the 9 people who died remained dead. Sarah attended the memorial service for those who had been killed. She stood in the back and listened to the eulogies. She looked at the families who had come to say goodbye to their children, siblings, spouses, parents. She thought about what she should have said. She thought about how she would have run that patrol. She thought about the fact that she was alive and they were not, and the only reason she was alive was because a colonel had decided she was not good enough. 3 days after the memorial service, Sarah submitted her request for reassignment. She asked to be transferred out of the artillery unit. She asked to be removed from Colonel Reeves's chain of command, though he was already gone. The request was approved within 48 hours. 2 months later, Sarah was assigned to a different unit at Fort Carson. She was now the executive officer for the logistics command, a desk job that required her skills but removed her from the field. It was a good position. It was also a demotion in everything but title. She did not complain. She did her job. She came in on time, did her work, and went home. But something inside her had changed. She had joined the army to be part of something bigger than herself. She had worked harder than almost everyone around her to prove that she belonged. She had sacrificed time with her family, her safety, her youth. And in the end, she had been marked, not for bravery, not for excellence. She had been marked for expendability. Sarah was now 33 years old. She still lived on base, though she spent most of her off-duty time in Riverside, in the house her parents had left her when they moved to Arizona. She still did her job well. She still arrived on time and followed procedure. But the spark that had driven her for so many years had dimmed to almost nothing. She had made few friends in her new assignment. The logistics command was run by Major General Kenneth Drake, who was precisely the kind of officer who believed in protocol and procedure above all else. He was fair but distant, the kind of leader who saw people as components in a system rather than as individuals. This suited Sarah fine. She did not want to be known. She did not want to be noticed. She wanted to do her job and be left alone. It was during a routine inventory check in the summer that everything changed. Sarah was auditing the equipment records for a shipment that had arrived from a supply depot in Texas. The records were detailed but contained several discrepancies. Equipment that had been shipped was not on the receiving list. Equipment that was listed had never arrived. She brought the discrepancy to her supervisor, Major Carl Hensley, who looked at the papers and then at her with an expression of mild annoyance. "They happen sometimes," he said. "Supply lines get crossed, it balances out eventually." "It doesn't balance out," Sarah said quietly. "We're missing 3 days of fuel supplies and 6 replacement transmission units. That's approximately $140,000 in equipment." "Approximately," Hensley repeated. "So you're not sure?" "I'm sure," Sarah said. "I've rechecked the inventory 3 times." Hensley set the papers down on his desk. He did not look at her as he spoke. "Captain Chen, I appreciate your attention to detail. Really, I do. But this is how things work at the supply level. There's always some loss. There's always some discrepancy. It's factored into the budget. If I report every little imbalance, I'm going to be filing reports all day, every day. Is that what you want?" Sarah did not answer. "Look," Hensley continued, finally meeting her eyes. "You're new to this command. You still have that field officer mentality. You think everything needs to be perfect. But logistics is different. It's about making things work within the parameters we're given, not about creating problems where there are none." Sarah took the papers back. She did not argue, she never argued, but she also did not let it go. She went through the records again, more carefully this time. She found that the discrepancy had happened 3 times in the past 18 months. 3 times, equipment shipped from the same supply depot in Texas had not arrived, or had arrived incomplete. 3 times, nothing had been done about it. She filed the information away, but said nothing to anyone. 2 weeks later, another shipment from Texas arrived. Sarah checked it personally before it was logged. It was missing 4 crates of ammunition and a complete generator unit. She brought this to Major Hensley again. This time, she had documentation of all 4 incidents. "This is a pattern," she said, laying the papers out on his desk. "There's something wrong with either the shipment process at the Texas depot or the receiving process here. We need to investigate it." Hensley looked at the papers for a long time. Then he looked at Sarah. "You need to drop this," he said, his voice low and careful. "For your own good, you need to drop this right now." Sarah felt something shift inside her. That tone, that warning. "Sir, there are people who don't appreciate having their operations scrutinized," Hensley said. "People who have relationships that matter. People who could make things very difficult for someone who starts asking too many questions." "Are you telling me that equipment is being deliberately withheld?" Sarah asked. "I'm telling you to let it go," Hensley said. Sarah left his office and immediately requested a meeting with Major General Drake. She was granted one for the following morning. She brought all her documentation with her. She laid it out clearly and explained what she had found. She showed him the pattern. She told him about Hensley's warning. Drake listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he sat back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. "You have no proof of deliberate malfeasance," he said finally. "You have a discrepancy in supply records. That's not a crime, Captain. That's a logistics problem." "Sir, the warning I received from Major Hensley suggests that there may be intentional." "Hensley was being protective," Drake interrupted. "These situations are sensitive. You're suggesting corruption, Captain Chen. That's a very serious accusation, and you need to be very sure before you make it." "I am sure," Sarah said. "The pattern is clear." "What's clear is that you found a supply problem," Drake said. "I'll have the Inspector General's office look into it. They handle these matters. They'll be impartial. Is that acceptable?" It was not acceptable. Sarah knew what happened when you sent a problem to the Inspector General's office in a military base. It went into a file. It was reviewed by people who had their own relationships to maintain. It disappeared. But she also knew that she was being dismissed. An officer did not argue with a major general. "Yes, sir," she said. She left his office and returned to her desk. 3 weeks later, she received a phone call from the Inspector General's office. They had reviewed her report. They had found several administrative issues that would be addressed through normal supply chain protocols. No evidence of deliberate theft or misappropriation of materials had been found. The case was closed. Sarah hung up the phone and stared at her computer screen. She thought about the 9 people who had died because a colonel had made a bad decision. She thought about how nothing had happened to him except early retirement and a move to a nice house in North Carolina. She thought about how the system was designed to protect the people who were part of it and destroy anyone who tried to change it from within. That evening she drove to Riverside. She parked in front of the diner and went inside. The place was crowded with the usual Tuesday night crowd: truck drivers, retirees, high school kids. Sarah sat in a booth and ordered coffee. She was about to leave when she saw him. Colonel Marcus Reeves was eating at the counter near the window. He was wearing civilian clothes, a polo shirt and khaki pants, but it was undeniably him. His mustache was the same. His posture was the same. He did not see her. She was 2 booths behind him, and he was focused on his pie and coffee. Sarah watched him eat. She watched him talk to the waitress, making her laugh. He was charming when he wanted to be. That was how he had survived this long. He was good at being likable when it mattered. She waited until he finished and got up to leave. She watched him pay his bill at the register. She watched him walk to the door. Then, as he was leaving, she stood up. "Colonel Reeves," she called out. He turned and looked at her. For a moment there was no recognition. Then his eyes widened slightly. "Captain Chen," he said, and he smiled. It was not a smile of joy or welcome. It was the smile of someone who was pleased to see someone he had defeated. "What a surprise! Are you still stationed at Fort Carson?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "I saw you and wanted to say hello." "That's kind of you," he said. "Well, I'll be heading out. Early retirement is treating me well. You should consider it if you get the chance. There's a whole world outside the military." He said it as if he was giving her helpful advice, as if he was being generous with his time. "I will, sir," Sarah said. "Thank you." She watched him leave. She watched him get into a blue sedan and drive away. That night, she went home to her house in Riverside, the house her parents had left her. She sat on the porch and looked out at the mountains in the distance. The same mountains she had looked at her entire childhood. The same mountains that had witnessed everything that had happened to her. She thought about the 9 people who were dead. She thought about the equipment that was being stolen from the military. She thought about Colonel Reeves retiring comfortably to North Carolina because he knew how to work the system. She thought about the fact that she was not going to let it go, not this time. She thought about the fact that if she did not let it go, if she pushed and asked questions, and refused to accept the answer that she had been given, it was going to destroy her career. She already knew how it would happen. She had seen it happen to other officers who had tried to fight the system. They were labeled as troublemakers. They were passed over for promotion. They were given the worst assignments. Their careers slowly died while everyone around them pretended not to notice. But as she sat on that porch and looked at those mountains, Sarah realized that her career had already died. It had died when Colonel Reeves pulled her from that deployment. It had died with the 9 people who had gone in her place. The only question now was whether she was going to do something about it, or whether she was going to let the system win. She did not file another report. She did not go to her commanding officers. Instead, she used her position in logistics to access information that she should not have had access to. It took 3 months, but she traced the discrepancies back to their source. The equipment was not being lost. It was being diverted. The shipments from Texas were being sent to a warehouse in a small town called Millbrook, about 50 miles outside of Fort Carson. The warehouse belonged to a company called Patriot Solutions, Inc. Patriot Solutions was a private contracting firm that provided services to the military: security, logistics support, training facilities. According to their public records, they were a legitimate business. According to the equipment trail that Sarah had followed, they were also receiving free military supplies. She pulled the records for who owned Patriot Solutions. The owner was listed as a man named David Cartwright, who was also listed as a consultant for the Department of Defense. Sarah spent 2 weeks tracing David Cartwright's connections. What she found was a web of relationships that connected military officers, defense contractors, and supply line officials. People who worked in the same circles. People who recommended each other for jobs. People who made decisions that favored each other's companies. And the person who had authorized the original supply contracts was Major General Kenneth Drake. Sarah sat in her office on a Friday afternoon and looked at the stack of papers in front of her. She had all the evidence she needed. She had traced the money, the equipment, the authorizations. She could prove that military supplies worth millions of dollars were being diverted to private companies for profit. She could prove it, and she could destroy her career in the process. She thought about calling her friend Patricia. She thought about going to the Inspector General again, though she already knew what would happen. She thought about calling a lawyer, though she did not know any lawyers. She thought about calling a journalist, though that was the kind of thing that military officers did not do if they wanted to continue being military officers. Instead, she drove to Riverside and parked her car in front of the house she had grown up in. Her parents were in Arizona now, but the house was still hers. She had kept it maintained, paid the taxes, and visited whenever she could get leave. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table where she had eaten breakfast every morning of her childhood. She looked at the space where her father's coffee mug used to sit. She looked at the window where her mother had stood so many mornings, watching the mountains while she thought about her day. She thought about what they would tell her. Her father, who had worked hard his entire life and believed in doing things the right way. Her mother, who had spent her career helping people and always said that honesty was the most important thing. She thought about what they would tell her, and she knew what the answer would be. On Monday morning, Sarah took a personal day and drove to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in Denver. She walked in and asked to speak to someone about military supply chain irregularities. A special agent named Lisa Friedman listened to her story for 3 hours. Sarah brought all her documentation. She explained how she had accessed the information. She told Friedman that she was prepared to testify about what she had found. Friedman listened and did not interrupt. When Sarah was finished, Friedman closed her notebook. "You understand that what you're telling me is a very serious accusation," Friedman said. "I understand," Sarah said. "You understand that if we proceed with an investigation, it's going to become public. There will be formal inquiries. There will be subpoenas. Your career will be affected." "I understand," Sarah said again. "And you're still willing to move forward." Sarah thought about the 9 people who were dead. She thought about the equipment that was missing. She thought about Colonel Reeves eating pie in the diner. She thought about Major General Drake sitting in his office, knowing exactly what was happening and doing nothing. "Yes," she said. "The FBI investigation took 6 months. During that time, Sarah continued to work at her job as if nothing was happening. She did not tell anyone what she had done. She came in, did her work, and went home. She maintained relationships with her colleagues as if everything was normal. But everything was not normal. Major General Drake had stopped greeting her in the hallways. Major Carl Hensley avoided her completely. She saw them in conversations with other officers that stopped as soon as she approached. Someone knew, but they did not know exactly what they knew. Then, at the end of the 6th month, everything changed. Sarah was called into Major General Drake's office. This time, she was not alone. There was a man in a suit who introduced himself as Special Agent Marcus Webb from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Captain Chen," Webb said, "you're not the subject of this investigation, but we're preparing to issue subpoenas related to the supply chain irregularities you reported. Before we do that, we want to make sure you understand the implications." "I understand," Sarah said. "The subpoenas will include records that contain your name. Your involvement in discovering this will become known. There will be a formal inquiry. You may be called to testify before a military tribunal." "I understand," Sarah said. "Major General Drake has asked to make a statement," Webb said. Drake, who had been standing by his window, turned and walked towards Sarah. "I want you to know," he said, "that I am disappointed. I gave you a position in this command because I believed in your ability. I believed you were a professional. Instead, you have conducted an illegal investigation of military supply records and then went to federal authorities without following proper channels. That is a betrayal of trust and a violation of military protocol. Sir, Sarah said carefully, the supply chain irregularities were documented. The diversion of military equipment was documented. What I did was report a crime. You reported a matter of concern through improper channels, Drake said coldly. Proper channels exist for a reason. He was right in a way. Proper channels did exist. They were also controlled by the same people who were benefiting from the theft. But Sarah did not say that. She simply accepted his anger and moved forward. The subpoenas were issued 2 weeks later. Equipment theft charges were filed against Patriot Solutions, Inc. David Cartwright was arrested and released on bond. Major Carl Hensley was suspended pending investigation. 4 civilian employees of the military supply depot in Texas were arrested for their roles in the diversion. And Major General Kenneth Drake was relieved of command pending a formal inquiry. The news was everywhere. It was in the Denver papers, the national papers, on military blogs and forums. The story of the female captain who had discovered a multi-million-dollar theft scheme was exactly the kind of story that people loved. Local hero uncovers military corruption, the headlines said. Fort Carson commander under investigation for supply theft scheme. Female captain takes on Pentagon corruption. Sarah hated every single headline. She was called to testify before a military tribunal in the 8th month of the investigation. She sat in a room with senior officers and presented her findings calmly and carefully. She showed them the documentation. She explained her methodology. She answered their questions. The tribunal concluded that the supply theft was substantiated and that it had involved military personnel. They recommended that court-martial proceedings be initiated against Major Carl Hensley. They recommended that Major General Kenneth Drake face administrative charges for failure of command oversight. They recommended that Patriot Solutions, Inc. be permanently barred from military contracts. The public story ended there. The military handled the rest internally in ways that were not available to the public. Sarah did not know exactly what happened to Drake. She did not know what happened to Hensley beyond the court-martial charges. She knew that David Cartwright eventually pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy and received a sentence of 2 years in federal prison. It was something. It was not justice, but it was something. The officers at Fort Carson stopped avoiding her. They did not embrace her either. She existed in a strange limbo, respected for her courage and resented for her actions in equal measure. Some people thought she was a hero. Others thought she was a turncoat who had broken the code of silence that held the military together. Sarah did not think about what people thought. She simply did her job. But she could feel the walls closing in around her. Officers who had once greeted her with friendly nods now nodded politely and moved on. Junior officers who had once sought her advice now stayed away. The command had been fractured by the investigation, and she was the fracture. She knew what was coming. She could see it approaching like a storm on the horizon. The axe fell 3 months later. Sarah was informed that she was being transferred to a base in Germany. The transfer was a punishment, dressed up in the language of career opportunity. Germany was not considered a desirable posting for an officer in her position. It meant being separated from the continental United States. It meant being removed from the chain of command that mattered. It meant, essentially, being exiled. She could have refused the transfer. She could have requested an administrative hearing. She could have fought it. But she also knew that if she fought it, she would be marked as someone who did not follow orders, someone who was difficult to manage, someone who was not a team player. She also knew that Major General Drake, despite the charges against him, still had friends in high places. Friends who could make sure that she never commanded a unit again, that she never saw real advancement, that she spent the rest of her military career doing desk work in places nobody wanted to be. The base in Germany was called Grafenwohr, located in northern Bavaria, about an hour from the Czech border. It was home to the U.S. Army's training facility for equipment and tactics. It was also home to units that conducted live-fire exercises with artillery. Sarah was assigned as the executive officer for an artillery training squadron. It was not a command position, but it was close to the field work she had done earlier in her career. She would be involved in planning and overseeing training exercises. She would be around the equipment and the people who operated it. When she first arrived at Grafenwoher, she wondered if the assignment was a small mercy. Maybe someone in the chain of command had taken pity on her and given her work that was closer to what she actually wanted to do, rather than the desk work that had characterized her time at Fort Carson. She found out the truth on her second week at the base. The commander of her squadron was Major Robert Kovac, a man in his late 40s with a weathered face and a reputation for running exercises that were as realistic and dangerous as military training could legally be. He had invited Sarah to his office on a Friday afternoon. "I know who you are," Kovac said without preamble. "I know about the investigation, I know about the supply theft, and I want you to know that I don't care." Sarah waited for him to continue. "I care about good training," Kovac said. "I care about officers and soldiers who know their jobs. You know your job, that's all that matters to me. Everything else is politics, and I don't have time for politics." He handed her a packet of training schedules. "Next month we have a live-fire exercise scheduled. It's going to be big. We're integrating 3 different artillery units from different countries. Germans, Poles, and Americans. New equipment, new tactics, new coordination protocols. I want you to plan it." Sarah looked at the packet. This was real work. This was the kind of work that mattered, that required skill and attention and actual decision-making. It was not exile disguised as opportunity. It was opportunity. "Thank you, sir," she said. For the first time since she had submitted her report to the FBI, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something like it. She threw herself into the planning of the exercise. She spent weeks coordinating with the German and Polish commanders. She studied the new equipment specifications. She created scenarios and contingencies. She worked harder than she had worked in years. The exercise was scheduled for mid-June. Sarah arrived at the training range an hour before dawn. The range at Grafenwoher was massive, thousands of acres of open terrain with berms and targets set up for every kind of artillery exercise. The commanders from Germany and Poland were already there, along with Major Kovac and a group of senior observers. Sarah walked them through the plan. The exercise would involve 3 phases of increasing complexity. The first phase would test coordination and communication. The second phase would test rapid deployment and readiness. The third phase would test integration of multiple unit types under realistic conditions. It was going to be demanding. It was also going to be exactly what they needed. The exercise began at dawn. Sarah watched from the command center as the first phase unfolded. The coordination was good. The communication was clear. Everything was working as planned. By mid-morning, they moved into the second phase. Units began deploying to secondary positions. Equipment was moved and set up. It was intricate work that required precision and timing. That was when the message came in. A junior officer came into the command center with a concerned look on his face. He handed a note to Major Kovac, who read it and then looked at Sarah. "We have an issue," Kovac said quietly. They stepped outside the command center. The junior officer explained that there had been an accident at one of the ammunition supply points. A vehicle had struck a stack of boxes, and several rounds of training ammunition had been damaged. It was not a critical issue, but it meant that one of the units would have fewer rounds available for the third phase of the exercise. "How many?" Sarah asked. "About 30% of their allocation," the officer said. Sarah considered this for a moment. 30% was significant. It meant that they would not be able to complete the full exercise as planned. "What are our options?" she asked. "We can pull ammunition from one of the other units," Kovac said, "or we can reduce the scope of the third phase." "If we reduce the scope, the exercise loses its value," Sarah said. "These units came from 3 different countries specifically to train in integrated operations. We need to show them that integration works." "Then we pull from one of the other units," Kovac said. Sarah thought about this. Which unit had the excess ammunition? She ran through the numbers in her head. The German unit had extra. The Polish unit was at standard allocation. "We pull from the Germans," she said. "They have 20% extra in their allocation. We can redistribute that and everyone will be at acceptable levels." Kovac nodded and was about to speak when Sarah stopped him. "Wait," she said. "Who was driving the vehicle that hit the ammunition stack?" "A junior enlisted soldier," the officer said. "Captain Robert Hensley, he." Sarah's blood went cold. "Hensley," she said. "His last name is Hensley." "Yes, ma'am," the officer said. Sarah looked at Kovac. "I need to know," she said quietly. "Is this soldier related to Major Carl Hensley, the one from the court-martial?" There was a moment of silence. Kovac's face had gone still. "His son," Kovac said finally. "I knew there was a connection when I saw the name on the roster. I was going to mention it to you, but the exercise started this morning and it just... I'm sorry. I should have told you immediately." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. She took a breath. "It was an accident," she said. "Not a question, a statement." "The investigation is already underway," Kovac said. "The preliminary review is showing that it was mechanical failure. The vehicle's brakes gave out. It was not operator error." Sarah nodded slowly. She had seen this happen before. An incident, an investigation, a conclusion. The narrative was already being written. She could choose to question it, to dig deeper, to look for conspiracy where there might only be coincidence. Or she could accept it and move forward. "Then we redistribute the ammunition as planned," Sarah said. "The exercise continues." "Sarah," Kovac said quietly, using her first name, which he had not done before. "I know this is difficult, but this soldier is not the same person as his father. He made a mistake, but it was his mistake, not yours to punish." "I know," Sarah said. "I'm not punishing him, I'm completing the exercise." By evening, the third phase was underway. All 3 artillery units were firing in coordinated sequence. The integration was working perfectly. The exercises were hitting their targets. The coordination between the 3 commands was textbook precision. Sarah watched from the command center, and she felt something like peace. Not because the exercise was going well, but because she was doing her job. Because she was focused on the task in front of her and not on the personal history that surrounded it. When the exercise concluded at sunset, the commanders gathered on the training range. There were handshakes and compliments. The German commander said it was the best coordinated exercise he had participated in. The Polish commander agreed. Major Kovac looked at Sarah and smiled. "That was excellent work," he said. "Best exercise I've seen at this facility." Sarah thanked him, but her attention was elsewhere. Across the range, she could see Captain Robert Hensley directing the dismounting of equipment. He was young, maybe 25, and he had the lean, precise movements of someone who cared about doing the job right. He looked nothing like his father. He also looked like someone who had no idea who Sarah was, or what his father had done, or what role she had played in his father's downfall. Sarah turned away and began walking back to the command center. That night, she sat in her quarters on the base and opened her email. There was a message from Special Agent Lisa Friedman, the FBI agent who had handled the investigation. "Captain Chen," the message read, "I wanted to reach out and let you know that the trial of David Cartwright has concluded. He was sentenced to 2 years federal prison with release scheduled for 18 months from now. The appeals process is underway, but the conviction is holding. I wanted to thank you for your courage in coming forward. The integrity of military supply chains depends on people like you. I hope you're doing well." Sarah read the email twice, then deleted it. She thought about the fact that 18 months from now, David Cartwright would be out of prison. She thought about the fact that Major Carl Hensley had received a dishonorable discharge, but had not served prison time. She thought about the fact that Major General Kenneth Drake had taken early retirement and was probably living a comfortable life somewhere, untouched by consequence. She thought about the fact that the 9 people who had died under Colonel Reeves's command were still dead. And she thought about the fact that she was sitting in a military base in Germany, planning exercises, trying to do good work in a system that was designed to reward the corrupt and punish the honest. She went to bed that night with the understanding that she had made a choice, and the choice had consequences, and the consequences were not finished yet. Sarah spent that time doing her job at Greifenwoher. She planned exercises, oversaw training, coordinated with international partners. She was good at her work, and the work was satisfying in the way that only real work can be. She was promoted to major. The promotion came through quietly, and she accepted it without much fanfare. In the military, you celebrated in private and moved on. At the end of her tour at Greifenwoher, Sarah had a choice to make. She could extend her tour and stay in Germany. She could take another overseas assignment, or she could request a transfer back to the continental United States. She requested the transfer. She was assigned to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. It was far from Fort Carson, far from Colorado, far from the place where everything had started. It was, Sarah thought, a sign that the system was trying to put her as far away as possible from the people and places she had affected through her investigation. But she did not care. She was ready to move on. On her last day at Grafenwoher, Major Kovac took her to dinner at a small restaurant in the nearby town. They talked about training and exercises and the future of military preparedness. They did not talk about the investigation or about David Cartwright or about any of the things that had brought her to Germany. "You did good work here," Kovac said as they finished dinner. "I know it was hard being sent away. I know people probably told you it was a punishment." "It was a punishment," Sarah said, "but you made it into an opportunity and I'm grateful." "You earned that opportunity," Kovac said. "And I want you to know something. What you did at Fort Carson, that investigation you pursued, that mattered. It doesn't feel like it right now, I know. It feels like you were punished for doing the right thing, but it mattered. The military is stronger because of what you did." "The military is the same," Sarah said quietly. "It always is." "No," Kovac said firmly. "It's not. People remember what you did. Officers think twice now before they participate in the kind of scheme that Hensley and Drake were involved in. It changes behavior. It might not feel like much, but it is something." Sarah wanted to believe him. She was not sure that she did. When Sarah arrived at Fort Bliss, she was assigned to work in the planning and operations section of the command headquarters. It was a promotion in rank, but a lateral move in authority. She was working at a higher level, but not in direct command of troops or operations. She settled into her quarters and tried to make a life in El Paso. She found a gym where she could work out. She found a restaurant that made good coffee. She established a routine. And then, 8 months after arriving at Fort Bliss, she received a phone call from Patricia Williams, her friend from Fort Carson. "Sarah," Patricia said without preamble, "I need to talk to you about something in person." "Of course," Sarah said. "What's wrong?" "I can't say on the phone," Patricia said, "but I'm going to be in El Paso next week for a conference. Can you meet me?" They met at a hotel bar near the airport. Patricia looked the same as she had 5 years ago, still in uniform, still carrying herself like someone who cared about her job and her reputation. "I need to tell you something," Patricia said without sitting down. "And I need you to listen, and I need you to not ask any questions until I'm done." Sarah nodded and did not speak. "Colonel Marcus Reeves died," Patricia said. "A heart attack in his home in North Carolina. It was 3 days ago. He was 47 years old." Sarah felt the words settle over her like a blanket of snow. "The reason I'm telling you," Patricia continued, "is because I received a letter from a lawyer on behalf of Reeves's widow. The letter contained information that Reeves had written down before he died." "What kind of information?" Sarah asked. "The information," Patricia said, sitting down now, "is a confession." Patricia laid an envelope on the table in front of Sarah. It was addressed to the Office of the Inspector General, United States Army. "It's a complete account," Patricia said quietly, "of the deployment that went wrong, the one where your section was hit by an IED. Reeves confessed to falsifying the after-action reports. He admitted that the patrol route was not compromised at all. He admitted that Captain Mitchell followed all protocols. He admitted that the deviation from the route was authorized by him verbally, and that he then claimed it was not authorized in order to cover his own mistakes." Sarah did not move. She did not speak. She simply sat and listened. "He was dying," Patricia said. "He had maybe weeks and his doctor told him. And he decided he wanted to clear his conscience. He wrote it all down. He had his lawyer send it to the Army." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because you need to know," Patricia said. "Because the investigation is being reopened. Because the 9 people who died in that incident, their families are going to be notified that the circumstances of their deaths were misrepresented by their commanding officer. Because justice, in some small way, is finally happening." Sarah felt something inside her chest break open. Not happiness, exactly, not closure, but something like acknowledgement, something like the weight of 2 years of grief and anger and frustration finally being recognized as legitimate. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Patricia said, "the Army reviews everything. They officially reopen the case. They acknowledge that Captain Mitchell and your section did not commit any violation of protocol, and they acknowledge that Colonel Marcus Reeves was responsible for making a decision that resulted in 9 deaths, and that he then lied about it to protect himself. And that helps, Sarah asked, now that he's dead. It helps the families, Patricia said. It helps them know that their loved ones died because of a bad decision made by someone at high rank, not because of a mistake made in the field. It helps them have answers. Sarah understood what Patricia was saying. It did help. Not for the 9 people who were dead, but for the people who had been left behind. Thank you for telling me, Sarah said. There's more, Patricia said. She pulled out a second envelope. This one is addressed to you. It was also in the package from Reeves's lawyer. Sarah took the envelope. Her name was written on it in precise military handwriting, the handwriting of Colonel Marcus Reeves. She did not open it that night. She went back to her quarters and placed the envelope on her desk and stared at it for a long time. Eventually, she poured herself a glass of water, sat down, and opened it. Inside was a letter, written in the same precise handwriting. Captain Chen, it read. I am writing this letter because I am dying, and dying men have a tendency to suddenly care about things like conscience and redemption and truth. I am writing to tell you that I know what I did. I know that I pulled you from a deployment and sent inferior personnel in your place. I know that 9 of those people died because of decisions I made. I know that I then falsified reports to cover my own mistakes. And I know that you discovered the truth about the supply theft at Fort Carson, and that discovery brought unwanted attention to my entire command. For years, I told myself that I was protecting the integrity of the military by maintaining silence about my mistakes. Now I understand that I was protecting myself. That is all I was ever protecting. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand what I did. I understand that you were the better officer, and I could not accept that. I understand that my pride and my inability to accept leadership from a woman was responsible for decisions that cost lives. You were right. You were always right. You deserved that deployment. You would have handled it differently. Those 9 people might have been alive if I had allowed you to do your job. I wanted to spend my last days not knowing that. I wanted to be comfortable and retired and convinced that I had done nothing wrong. But I could not. So now I am telling the truth, and I am dead, and the truth does not bring anyone back. I hope that you will use this truth to find whatever peace you can. Respectfully, Colonel Marcus Reeves. The Army's official review of the incident that killed 9 soldiers took 4 months. Sarah was asked to provide a statement. She did, carefully and completely. She described what she knew about the patrol, about the protocols, about the decisions that had been made. When the review was complete, the Army issued an official statement. The circumstances of the incident had been misrepresented in the original after-action reports. Captain Mitchell had followed proper protocol. The 9 soldiers who died had died because of a combat operation, not because of any violation of procedure. The families of the 9 soldiers received letters of apology. They received revised casualty briefings. They received recognition that their loved ones had died serving their country, not because of negligence or failure. It was not enough, but it was something. Sarah was not surprised to receive, 6 months later, a phone call from a person she had not expected to hear from. Captain Mitchell's sister, the voice on the phone said, "Is this Major Sarah Chen?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I'm sorry for the loss of your brother." "I wanted to thank you," the sister said, "for what you did, for investigating the supply theft. If you hadn't done that, if you hadn't raised questions, the investigation would never have been reopened. We would never have known the truth about what happened to my brother." Sarah did not know what to say. She had not done the investigation for the family of Captain Mitchell. She had done it for herself. She had done it because she could not accept the lie. "You're welcome," she said finally. A year after the Army's review was complete, Sarah was promoted to lieutenant colonel. The promotion ceremony was held at Fort Bliss, in front of several hundred soldiers and officers. There were speeches and formalities, and at the end, the commanding general presented her with the insignia of her new rank. That evening, she sat in her quarters and looked at the insignia. She thought about the fact that she was now at a rank where she could have significant influence on policy and procedure. She thought about the fact that she could use her position to try to prevent the kinds of corruption and cover-ups that she had uncovered. She thought about the fact that the system had tried very hard to destroy her for doing the right thing, and that she had survived it anyway. 3 years later, at the age of 41, Sarah Chen was given command of an artillery unit at Fort Sill in Oklahoma. It was a significant assignment, one that put her in charge of operations that mattered, decisions that affected hundreds of people, and millions of dollars in military capability. On the first day of her command, she called an all-hands meeting. She stood in front of the assembled soldiers and officers and spoke to them about integrity, about following procedure, about the importance of speaking up when something did not seem right. "I have spent my entire career," she told them, "trying to do this job correctly. I have made mistakes. I have made decisions that I regretted, but I have never compromised on integrity, and I never will. In this unit, we follow the rules. We follow them not because we are afraid of punishment, but because we believe in them, because we believe that integrity is the foundation of everything we do." The soldiers listened. Some of them were hearing this for the first time. Others had served under her before and knew that she meant what she said. A month into her command, Sarah received an email from Special Agent Lisa Friedman at the FBI. "Captain Chen," it read, "I wanted to reach out because David Cartwright's sentence has been completed. He was released from federal prison yesterday. I thought you would want to know. Also, I wanted to let you know that due to new evidence and the reopened investigation into the original incident, there are discussions about reopening the investigation into the supply theft scheme as well. Cartwright may face additional charges. I will keep you updated if there are developments." Sarah read the email and felt very little. David Cartwright was out of prison. Colonel Reeves was dead. Major General Drake was living somewhere, retired and untouched. The system had worked to protect those who mattered and punish those who did not. And yet something had changed. The rules were different now. Officers understood that they could not behave with impunity. Junior officers understood that if they saw something wrong, they could report it and someone would listen. It was not perfect. It was not even close to perfect. But it was something. On the first day of the artillery exercises that Sarah had planned for her new unit, she stood on the observation platform and watched the first unit move into position. The day was hot and clear, and the sound of the equipment rolling across the desert was like thunder in the distance. She thought about the exercises she had planned in Germany. She thought about the training she had overseen at Fort Carson. She thought about the deployment she should have been part of, the one that had cost 9 lives. She thought about the fact that she was here now, in command of her own unit, doing work that mattered, and that she had gotten here through honesty and integrity, and a refusal to accept the system's attempt to break her. The first artillery piece moved into position. The gun crew performed their pre-fire checks with precision and speed. Then, at the appointed time, the first cannon fired. The sound was tremendous, the sound of a device designed to project tremendous force across a vast distance. The sound of power and purpose and intention. The shot landed exactly where it was supposed to land, on the target 1,000 meters away, precise and purposeful and true. Sarah smiled slightly as she watched the training exercise continue. The second gun fired, then the third, then the entire unit working in coordinated sequence, each piece firing at exactly the right moment, each shot landing exactly where it was supposed to land. This was what she had fought for, not glory or recognition or vindication. This moment of coordinated excellence, this demonstration of precision and integrity and professionals doing their jobs exactly as they were trained to do. The exercise continued through the afternoon. Every unit performed exactly as it was supposed to perform. Every soldier did exactly what they were supposed to do. Every decision was made exactly as it was supposed to be made. By the time the exercise ended at sunset, Sarah felt something like peace settle over her. Not the peace of knowing that everything was right, because it was not. The world was still complicated, and the system was still broken in many ways, and there would always be people who tried to break the rules and people who tried to protect them. But there was peace in knowing that she had done her job. There was peace in knowing that she had stood up for what was right, even when it cost her. There was peace in knowing that the 9 people who had died were finally acknowledged as having died not because of negligence, but because of combat. It was not justice. Justice would have been those 9 people being alive, but it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was truth. It was the sound of that cannon firing, true and clear and purposeful across the desert. That cannon was still firing, Sarah thought as she watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. That cannon had been silent for a long time, marked as lost and gone and expendable. But the battlefield had heard it again, loud and clear, and it would keep firing as long as there were people willing to make sure it did. Sarah turned away from the observation platform and walked back toward her command center. There was work to be done. There were soldiers to lead. There was a unit to shape and train and prepare for the challenges that were coming. She had been marked as KIA in a way, marked as finished, as done, as no longer useful to the system. But she had heard that cannon again, and she had answered its call. And now she would make sure that it never stopped firing. 5 years later, the Army published an official report on the supply chain theft that had occurred at Fort Carson. It was a comprehensive document that detailed the years of diversion, the millions of dollars involved, and the military and civilian personnel who had been involved. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen was mentioned in the report as the officer who had discovered the irregularities and had the courage to report them through proper channels, despite the personal cost. The report also noted that because of her investigation, the military had implemented new oversight procedures for supply chains across all major installations. It noted that David Cartwright's company, Patriot Solutions, Inc., had been permanently barred from military contracts. Most importantly, the report officially acknowledged that the 9 soldiers who had died in the incident that had led to the investigation were acknowledged as having died in combat, not as a result of negligence or violation of protocol. Their families received copies of the report. Their names were added to official records of soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice. And in the office of Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, on a shelf above her desk, there was a framed photograph of the 9 soldiers. Below their names, she had written a simple caption. They heard the cannon fire even in silence. The battlefield remembers.